There were mixed results from Trump-backed candidates and some Democrats in Tuesday's coast-to-coast primaries. Republicans largely opted to keep their incumbents, rejecting challenges from candidates who align themselves more closely to former President Trump. For Democrats, more progressive candidates showed strength in several key races. So for more on this, we want to bring in CBS News political analyst Leslie Sanchez, Analysts, plural, and Antjuan Seawright. Leslie is a Republican strategist. Antjuan is a Democratic strategist. Really nice to see you guys. So, Antjuan, I'm going to start with you because this race for Attorney General, or this, it's not a race. They wanted to
call him.
Right, recall the Attorney General in San Francisco is particularly interesting. Rising concerns over crime, homelessness have sort of burst to the forefront of Tuesday's primaries, with voters in San Francisco ousting progressive District Attorney Chesa Boudin. So my question to you is, what does this mean for Democrats moving forward? Will they be rethinking their approach towards crime, or if not the approach, the messaging?
Well, I think this should send a message. We have to be crystal clear that we are for protecting our communities, we are for protecting our citizens, and we are pro-law enforcement. What I also think we have to be clear about is that a few voices on the choir do not speak for the entire Democratic choir. The truth be told, the president and majority of Democratic leaders, especially those elected across the country at every level, have been very clear that we are for keeping our community safe and our constituency safe. However, there are a few people who have this idea or notion of defunding the police, and that seems to be the order of the day, or what Republicans use to be as a weapon of mass destruction and mass political distraction. What I also do know is that we can be pro-law enforcement, but also pro-accountability in making certain that law enforcement, in particular police officers, are not killing and mishandling black and brown people at the rates we've seen before. We've all seen the videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Leslie, let's turn to you now. What did you make of how candidates endorsed by former President Trump did? Not all of them won as expected.
Right, Vlad. It's a mixed bag with Trump, and that yesterday's primary is consistent with what we've seen all throughout 2022. You have a handful, predominantly incumbents, that are going to do continuously well with or without the former president's endorsement. Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, certainly Senator Grassley in Iowa. And if you look at the long list, it was predominantly incumbents this time around. This is very different from what happened last week with the big spanking, I think you could say, in Georgia with David Perdue losing by massive 50 points plus, and that endorsement was key. What's interesting when you see these endorsements, the candidates that rely singly on the word of the former president to raise money, they wrap themselves around them in ads. George P. Bush in his race in Texas for Attorney General, same thing. They tend to be unsuccessful. It is the candidates that are more independent, have more grassroots support and a better pulse on their own states and communities that are using that to continue to victory. So I think looking forward, it's going to be a mixed bag with Trump.
So Leslie, let me ask you a question. This is a comment I was making to Vlad. You know, as we cover sort of these races, we keep asking about the president, whether the former president's influence is enough or not. But it occurred to me, at least in the last sort of group of races that we covered, that, you know, all the other candidates are sort of pretty Trumpy as well. Even if they're, you know, they agree that Joe Biden won the election in 2020, a lot of their other positions, whether the former president backs them or not, are in line with him. And so I don't know how much this indicates the direction of the party when you know, whether or not there's a divergence within the party, because it seems like the candidates all are sort of in lockstep. Right.
That's an excellent question. And the reason is there is this through line, this strong progressive through line going back to the Tea Party. And there were inklings of it even before that has permeated through the party, pushed out a lot of the establishment, what we call traditional incumbent, kind of Ronald Reagan-esque type Republicans, for this new acolyte that is very much like Donald Trump. The difference is Donald Trump, there is a true Donald Trump fatigue, even among Republicans and individuals who liked Trump or voted for Trump. and are looking for the new way. They're ready to kind of close that chapter and find a new way forward. So many of the same themes that the former president had, you're hearing them echoed in campaign ads, but with their own spin. That they are tried and true. The reason you see this groundswell of Republican support among independents, among conservative Democrats, and the reason that the Republicans feel bullish going into the midterm elections.
So, Antjuan, for Democrats, it appears that in some states, the more progressive Democratic candidates won over the more moderate candidates. But to Anne-Marie's point about that first question, there are some who are Democrats who are arguing that generally, the way the Republicans frame Democrats is very general. They'll say, well, Democrats want, and they frame it by saying all Democrats want open borders, all Democrats want to, kill babies in the womb, all Democrats want to take away police. But the reality, as you pointed out, is there may be some very extreme members of your party that feel that defund the police is a good message, or that, abolishing ICE is something that should be done, but the majority of Democrats do not. And so how do Democrats make that point, bring that message that, the Republicans are just generalizing us? A lot of Democrats are actually pretty moderate. Some would even consider...
Including the president, who is not a supporter of defund
the police. That's right, who are more, sort of left of center as opposed to extreme left.
Well, I'll say this. For the most part, we're very pragmatic in our thought. I welcome the diversity of our party, those who find themselves in the moderate lane and even those who find themselves on the left lane of the political highway. We welcome the big tent diversity in thought and all the other things that go along with political diversity. But what I will tell you is that we can be progressive, we can be forward-leaning in our thinking, but at the same time be pragmatic in our approach. And when it comes to issues like crime and some of these other things that people do not view from a partisan lens, we have to be pragmatic and honest about what is realistic in terms of getting something done to change the narrative. Where I think we've made a mistake as a party, we've let the opposition party, the Republican Party, define us and our messengers instead of us as a party defining our message with our own messengers. And you're starting to see that play out in some of the Democratic primaries. Vlad and Anne-Marie and Leslie, I oftentimes remind myself that political primaries on both sides are really about muscle tone. It's what side has been able to work their muscles the most. And on election day, you'll see the definition in the results. What is happening in the Democratic Party, it seems as if in some cases, not all, in some cases, the more forward-leaning progressive style candidates, you see more muscle definition in the results. And that does not mean that the party has taken a big shift, because I think President Joe Biden and some of the other primary results indicate that we're still a center-left party from a holistic standpoint.
Leslie, where else did Republicans feel sort of really good yesterday? And can you tell us a little bit more about the House primary in Montana and why this is a race to watch?
Well, overall, you're talking about the House primary, Congressional District 1, the Ryan Zinke?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So Ryan Zinke, former Interior Secretary for Donald Trump, he certainly had the endorsement of the president, is in really a very close primary. They were still counting as of late last night for this newly drawn congressional district. This is one of those races a lot of people are watching to see if the halo effect of Donald Trump can really pull one of his, closest allies, funders, and cabinet secretaries over the finish line. So far, it looks like he will be victorious here, but it certainly leaves a lot of people locally scratching their heads. And if I could, Anne-Marie, really quickly, I want to just address the muscle tone thing. We all want to run to the gym right now. It is summer. But,
Leslie.
We all want to be strong and fit. But what he's really, I wish more people would be listening to what Antjuan is saying, certainly in the Democratic Party, because he harkens back to the victories of 2018, those types of messages that were right down the middle. That is not the Democratic Party of today. This big progressive pull to the left and this big defeat of the recall of the Attorney General, for example, because of the smash and grab kind of efforts that are happening in these big cities. They're looking at having a recall in Los Angeles, and you're seeing this for the first time, this inkling of strength among Republican candidates, even in the LA mayoral race, who are looking at those homelessness issues, the lack of law enforcement, because the progressive experiment around defunding police and ending lawlessness and not prosecuting them is starting to pay off. And in this case, it's for Republicans, and many voters have realized it's hurt their communities. So it's not the message Antjuan's talking about, that fit strong message. It's one more out in the atmosphere that a lot of people do not connect with.
And so, Leslie, with a couple of primaries still to go, how are congressional races shaping up? And let's talk about how redistricting has shifted things, perhaps in Republicans' direction, but not all. We note that in California, young Kim is in a tough re-election battle, and the reason she's a Republican, the reason she's not doing as well is because her district is being redistricted, and it heavily favors a Democrat.
Right. Mike Garcia's in the same kind of issue, race situation, though he flipped his seat by just a handful of votes, a couple of hundred votes last go around. Republicans feel strong about it for a few reasons. Historical headwinds. We know historically that the first election after a new presidency bodes well for the opposing party. You saw it with Obama in 2010 when he lost 63 seats. You saw it with Donald Trump 2018 when he lost over 40. Republicans feel the wind at their backs with respect to that. Republicans hold a majority of state houses and legislatures, so they were drawing these lines, feel very strong about that. And they only really have to move those 5 seats. If you're looking at like Cook Political Report, the dynamic of how many are really toss-ups, maybe 20. How many of them are really competitive, maybe 30. So there's a smaller group, but that is certainly a big enough area where Republicans can be competitive, and they look very strong, not only in their coffers, but their candidates going into November.
Hey, listen, before I let you guys go, I want to ask you actually about a race that's like not happening at the federal level, right? The mayoral race in LA, because I think it's so interesting. You have, a Congresswoman, Karen Bass, and you have Rick Caruso, who's a former Republican, big money developer in a town where people have been crying for affordable housing, right? Everything's being turned into a condo. And I just find it really curious that we're going into a runoff in November now. So Leslie, Antjuan, I just want to get your take on this race.
That's the race I was just talking about. Rick Caruso, he's a billionaire, very much like a Michael Bloomberg type of figure. He is running on homelessness, the issue of homelessness, and getting the city, the crime issue back in order. Those two themes are very strong in California, not only because of those smash and grab issues, but there's a lot of cases that have come forward that, a mother with her child who was, nearly run over by a teenager, and that it really just got a slap in the hand. A lot of voters feel that the city has really gone in the wrong direction, and they want to see a more stern hand with reasonable, kind of, in some senses, business-type solutions to try something different to fix and empower their city.
Antjuan, can you buy an election? He's putting a lot of money into this race.
Well, we have to be realistic. He's committed to spend $100 million to win this election. Elections are, yes, emotions, and yes, policy drive the conversation. However, when it comes to displaying that message, whether it's TV, radio, print, and all the elements that go into refining a campaign, he's been able to do that almost 10 to 1 to all of the other candidates combined in this race. And so what I think Congresswoman Bass is going to have to do is she's going to have to figure out how to cut through the noise. She's going to figure out that money, just like in the Tom Steyer presidential race we experienced a couple years ago, money should not and not always rule the day, but it should be about message and connecting the dot with voters. We settle disputes and differences at the ballot box in this country, and sometimes money plays a role, but people also play a role. And yes, homelessness is an issue and all that, but I do think experience should matter. And I do think that Ms. Bass, by far, is the better experienced candidate. The question will be, will the money decide that or not in the results in November?
All right, Leslie and Antjuan, as always, we thank you.